Here's what Professor Fuentes says in the Psychology Today article, and I quote, "In humans today, there are not multiple biological groups called races. However, race is real and it impacts us all. What we call race are social categories." That's the first quote from the article. Second quote from the article, "There is currently one biological race in our species, Homo sapiens sapiens. However, that does not mean that what we call races, that is our society's way of dividing people up, don't exist. Societies like the US construct racial classifications, not as units of biology, but as ways to lump together groups of people with varying historical, linguistic, ethnic, religious, or other backgrounds. These categories are not static. They change over time as societies grow, diversify, and alter their social, political, and historical makeups. For example, in the US, the Irish were not always white. And despite our government's legal definition, most Hispanics, Latinos are not seen as white today, that is by themselves or by others," unquote. And the last statement from the same Psychology Today article, Professor Fuentes says, "The biologized racial fallacy," and I quote him here, "influences people to see racism and inequality not as the products of economic, social, and political histories, but more as a natural state of affairs," unquote. A lot of implications in that last statement, as well as in the other statements that we'll be delving into today at New Wine Tastings. Now for the quotes from Professor Swaminathan's article recently written for, it was actually in an interview with Christianity Today in January 2020, earlier this year. Here are a few of the statements he makes in the interview, and I quote, "One thing I've learned is it's really common for people to bring race into questions about human origins, often to attack those with whom they disagree. We all inherit that legacy of racism. Origins is often approached from a very whitewashed perspective. It doesn't really engage the concerns of people of color, who are often underrepresented in the conversations. What I found as a dark Indian is that these questions of origin are actually, or of origins are actually very closely tied to our concerns about our worth and dignity in the world," unquote. Second quotation from the same Christianity Today interview with Professor Swaminathan. He says, "The important thing to emphasize is that the science of origins is solidly against the idea of a biologically distinct race. This is something that really needs to be said more often. We have a better understanding of how we are all connected in one family. Genealogical science makes that clear," unquote. Last statement from the article, from the interview. "Polygenesis was a false theory of origins that was often conscripted to provide support for racism. It's the idea that the humans alive today are divided into biological groups that have been separated in the past and have distinct biological abilities, different theological roles, and varying levels of rights and dignity. That's just totally false. One of the main reasons people historically rejected evolutionary science is that it seemed to be teaching polygenesis. In fact, for about a century, many scientists would have endorsed that theory. Then, starting in the 1970s, several different lines of evidence cropped up to demonstrate that polygenesis is complete nonsense," unquote. A great deal of meaning bound up with these quotes and a lot of import for our discussion, especially as we think of our current cultural moment today in America and beyond. So let's go deeper into these various claims. The first question is for Professor Fuentes. Why do many people today think that there are many biological races in our species, when in fact there is only one presently, Augustine?
Well, the short, succinct answer to why do many people think there are biological races is racism. That is that system, that structure, that systemic process that intentionally groups people in particular ways and separates them in order to support particular political, social, economic histories, contemporary realities, and hierarchies. So if you were in a society that tells you that this is the way things are, you see that, right? So that's the broad thing. So racism gives us races, right? That's how it's maintained and created. Now, one thing that people might say, well, but I can tell the difference between someone who's black and white. To which my response was, actually, you can only in your given context. And I would ask, well, what do you use? Like, well, people look different. Some people have dark skin, some people have light skin. I said, yes, but that is not correlated with origin in Europe and Africa. In fact, dark skin and light skin come from many, many populations around the planet. So people base their own perspective on their individual experience. In the United States, we have categorized people in certain ways. There's a systemic system of racism that facilitates and maintains this perspective about races. And people look different. There's a lot of human variation biologically. And so what people do is take superficial biological characteristics, meld that with a racist system, and therefore when they look in the world, they see race, right? It's not seeing as believing. What it is if I hadn't believed it, I wouldn't have seen it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Fascinating. And no doubt with other questions, we'll be able to synthesize even what you just said there.